At 4:12 p.m., the world stopped moving. Everyone froze, except the man who was already staring at me. I didn't notice the exact second it happened. I wasn't looking for anything strange. I was just trying to get home before the sky turned fully dark, walking the same route I always take from the bus stop. It was the kind of cold, washed-out day where the light feels thin and tired, and everyone moves a little faster just to get out of it. Cars rolled past in waves. A siren whined in the distance. A plastic bag chased its own tail along the pavement. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. That's what unsettles me most now, how ordinary everything was, right up to the moment it wasn't. I reached the pedestrian crossing near the small row of shops and stopped at the red light. The usual strangers clustered around me, a woman in a gray coat checking her watch, an older man with a heavy shopping bag, a teenager folded around his phone, headphones glowing faint blue. Somewhere behind me, a child dragged something along the pavement, the scraping sound rising and falling in an uneven rhythm. That blur of footsteps, engines, voices, and weather was so familiar that when it changed, my brain didn't understand at first what had gone missing. It was like someone turned the volume down on the world in a single twist. Not silence, just absence. The engines dimmed. The conversation behind me sliced itself in half. Even the faint hiss of wind dropped away. My ears rang with the lack of it. I frowned, shifted my weight, and told myself I was imagining things. Then the light turned green. I stepped forward with everyone else, body on autopilot, one foot leaving the curb. That was the exact moment the world locked. The woman in the gray coat froze mid-step, heel hanging over the road, her scarf arrested halfway through a swing. The older man's bag was caught mid-sway, plastic stretched but motionless. The teenager's thumb hovered above his screen, eyes locked on a message he would never finish reading. Even the child's dragging sound stopped so abruptly it felt like someone had cut it out of the air with a blade. They didn't slow. They didn't hesitate. They simply stopped. My own foot landed on the tarmac. The sound of my soul hitting the road was a single clean slap in an air that had gone too thick. I staggered because I was moving and nothing else was. A car at the junction sat locked mid-turn, driver frozen with his mouth half open. A dog on the far pavement hovered with all four paws off the ground, tail suspended in a perfect arc behind it. Exhaust fumes formed a motionless cloud behind another car, a pale ghost stuck in place. It wasn't a trick of perception. It wasn't some coordinated prank. The world was paused, all except for me and him. I saw him when I turned in a slow circle, my heart thudding hard enough that I could feel it in my teeth. He stood near the corner by the newsagent's window, a dark coat buttoned to the throat, hands in his pockets. If anything about him had been softer, I might have missed him in the frozen crowd. But he didn't blend in. His presence was too sharp, too deliberate. He was moving, not much. A subtle shift of weight, a slow turn of the head. But against the absolute stillness, even that small motion was obscene. His eyes tracked my rotation like he'd been waiting for me to notice him. When our gazes met, it felt like he'd hooked something behind my ribs. Relief hit first. Another conscious person, someone who might tell me this was a gas leak, a film shoot, a seizure, anything with rules. That relief turned to something colder when I realized he wasn't confused. He wasn't staring at the hovering dog or the frozen drivers. He was looking only at me, like the rest of it didn't exist. He began to walk toward me. His steps were slow and unhurried, like he had more time than the rest of the world combined. I listened for the sound of his shoes on the road and heard nothing. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I couldn't make my legs back away, but I couldn't make myself move toward him either. I stood there in the dead center of the crossing, feeling like I was pinned in place by his attention. He stopped an arm's length away. Up close, his face was so forgettable it became uncanny, features that would be impossible to describe accurately if I looked away. But his eyes were wrong. Their flat gray color wasn't strange, but the way he looked at me was. There was no curiosity, no panic, no shared disbelief. He was assessing me. When he spoke, his voice slid cleanly through the padded silence. "You're not supposed to be awake," he said. The sentence landed with a weight that made my stomach twist. My mouth opened automatically. "What is this?" My voice sounded rough. "What's happening?" He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening for something beyond us. "They're between moments," he said. "You shouldn't be standing here with me while they are." He glanced past me at the frozen bodies, then back again. "You were supposed to stop with them." "I feel fine," I said. "I was just walking. The light changed and you stayed conscious," he said, cutting across me. "That's the problem." I swallowed hard. "I don't understand." "I know," he said softly. "You're not meant to." He took another half-step closer. I could see my reflection in his eyes, a tiny distorted figure in a bigger, flatter world. "Listen to me," he said. "You don't need to understand what it is. You just need to follow one instruction." I shouldn't have asked, but the question came out anyway. "What instruction?" "Do not go home tonight." I stared at him. Of all the things he could have said, that was the one that landed nearest the bone. Not "don't talk," not "don't move," not "don't tell." Don't go home. Don't go into the one place that, up until that moment, had felt like mine. Why? My voice sounded thin. His expression didn't change. "Because that's where it will fix you," he said. "And once it does, you won't remember that you didn't belong to it." Before I could ask what it was, before I could do anything but stand there with my heart hammering, the world lurched. It was like someone let go of a button. Noise crashed back over us in a single wave. Engines roared, a horn blared, the child's dragging sound resumed mid-scrape. The dog completed its jump and landed, barking. The woman in the gray coat finished her step off the curb. A bus whooshed past, close enough that the wind buffeted my coat. I staggered, thrown by the sudden movement. A man behind me swore as I stopped dead in front of him. He shouldered past without looking up from his phone, as though nothing strange had happened. Around me, life resumed in the exact positions it had held a breath earlier, except for the man in the dark coat. He hadn't frozen and restarted like everyone else. He stood exactly where he'd been, watching me. For a heartbeat, our eyes met again. "Don't go home," he said. His lips barely moved, but I felt the words more than I heard them. Then he turned and walked away, slipping into the flow of people like a stone dropped into a river. No one glanced at him. No one stepped aside. He moved through them like he'd done this 1,000 times before. I wanted to run after him, demand a real explanation, force him to stand in the open where the world was ordinary and admit it had been a trick. Instead, I finished crossing the road because the light was already changing back, and the habit of not getting hit by a car is stronger than most instincts. By the time I reached the far curb and turned, he was gone. I walked the rest of the way to my building with his warning sitting heavy in the back of my skull. Every time I thought about turning onto my street, my body slowed as if it wanted to stop short of the familiar front door and sit down on the pavement instead. I told myself it was just adrenaline, that I was shaken by whatever had happened and overreacting, that if there was something physically wrong with me, seizure, stroke, tumor, it wouldn't be solved by wandering around until midnight. By the time I reached the corner, it was already getting dark. I stood there and looked toward my building, counting windows, checking for any sign that the world had changed shape around it. It looked exactly like it had that morning. Brick and glass and grime and the weak yellow light above the entrance. I thought about cheap coffee, my sofa, the silence of my flat with the television on in the background. I thought about how insane I would sound calling anyone I knew and trying to describe what had just happened. I thought about the man's eyes and the way he'd said, "Fix you," like I was a glitch. Then I walked home anyway. That's what I keep coming back to. It wasn't that I didn't believe him. It was that I couldn't imagine any reality where the words of a stranger in a frozen street had more power than the gravity of my front door. The second I stepped into the stairwell, I knew I'd made a mistake. The stairwell looked the same as always, scuffed walls, metal rail, the familiar smell of dust and old paint. But the air felt wrong, too dense, like the space had been packed a little too tightly. I couldn't hear the usual muffled sounds of other people's lives. No televisions leaking through walls, no footsteps overhead, no distant clatter of plates. The building sounded held. I climbed slowly, listening to my own breathing. Each footstep echoed back in a flattened way, as though the stairwell was wider than its walls. The hallway outside my flat was dim. One of the bulbs had burned out, leaving a slight strobe at the far end. A takeaway menu lay half-pushed under my neighbor's door, caught mid-delivery. The air smelled faintly of something sweet that had been left too long. My key felt too loud in the lock. The click of the deadbolt made me flinch. When I opened the door, my flat greeted me with the same stillness as the stairwell. The lights were off. The gray evening light leaked around the edges of the curtains. My living room was exactly as I'd left it. Blanket over the sofa arm, mug on the table, clock on the wall. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. The clock said 4:12. My phone, when I checked it, said 5:03. I stood there in the doorway with my keys still in my hand and watched the second hand on the clock tick. It ticked without moving the minute hand, a useless motion. I took it down, opened the back and pulled the battery out. The ticking stopped. It didn't make me feel better. When I straightened up again, my phone's lock screen no longer said 5:03. It said 4:12. The moment I saw the numbers, something in the room changed. The air thickened. The faint rumble of pipes in the walls cut off halfway through. The street noise beyond the window dropped away. It was the same narrowing I'd felt at the crossing, but this time it closed around my home. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back. Outside, the side street behind the building had frozen. A car hung mid-curve near the corner. A woman carrying a bag of groceries was paused with one foot off the curb. Across the road, a man with a dog stood with his hand raised, the leash a taut line between his fingers and the animal's collar. Nothing moved. Behind me, the kettle in the kitchen clicked on by itself. The sound shot through the silence like a bullet. I spun around, heart slamming into my throat. I hadn't touched the kettle. I hadn't been in the kitchen. Steam began to curl out of the doorway, slowly at first, then thicker. The rational part of my mind was gone. There was only the need to see what was happening, and the need not to, fighting inside the same skin. The first won by a fraction. I walked into the kitchen. The light was already on. The kettle sat on its base, humming, building to a boil. A single bead of water hung in the air above the spout, caught mid-rise. The clock on the microwave also said 4:12. Its colon didn't blink. Someone was sitting at my table. He looked like he belonged there and didn't, in the same breath. Dark coat, hands folded neatly, posture relaxed with a kind of contained alertness. The man from the crossing didn't seem out of place in my kitchen. That scared me more than anything else. "How did you get in?" I asked. He didn't answer. His eyes flicked briefly to the kettle, then back to me. "I told you not to come home," he said. "I live here," I said. "You can't just... What is this? Why is everything frozen again?" He studied me for a long moment. "Because the correction passes through here," he said. "You brought yourself into its path." "The correction," I repeated, clinging to the word because it was something concrete. "For what?" "For you," he said. "For the version of you that belongs in this timeline." "I am the version of me that belongs here," I snapped. "This is my flat, my things, my life." He nodded once, almost conceding the point. "It was," he said, "until it wasn't." The kettle fell silent. It didn't whistle. The hum just cut off. The droplet of water above the spout stopped trembling. "The world you walk around in," he went on, "needs adjustments. Little pauses, resets. You don't notice most of them. You call it déjà vu when a seam shows. You tell yourself stories about fate when you feel something realign. You were never supposed to see the work being done." "Who is you?" I said. "Who are you in this?" "Maintenance," he said. "Call me that." "And me? What am I?" He looked at me in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. "Excess," he said. It took a second to sink in. "Excess," I repeated, feeling my throat tighten. "You mean extra?" "I mean you didn't transfer cleanly," he said. "When they brought the new version of you in, when they rewrote the sequence, you didn't go under. Your awareness stayed where it shouldn't. So now, there are two of you." "There aren't," I said. There's me, and there's you, and... Come and see, he said quietly. I didn't want to follow him back into my living room. I did anyway. He walked with that same unhurried certainty, as if he knew exactly how this would end. The television was on when we stepped through the doorway, though I hadn't touched the remote. The screen showed static that seemed to move in slow, deliberate patterns rather than random noise. The blue light from it washed the room. Someone was sitting on my sofa, watching it. From behind, all I could see was the back of their head, the slope of their shoulders. The shirt was mine. The hair was mine. The posture, the way they leaned slightly to one side, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, that was mine too. It felt like watching a recording of a night I hadn't lived yet. The person on the sofa raised a hand to rub their forehead. My own hand tingled in the same place. They turned. Looking straight at myself broke something quiet and important inside me. My brain tried to tell me it was a mirror, but the angles were wrong. There was no frame, no glass, just my face on someone else's head, moving independently of me. If I'd seen a grotesque version, rotted flesh, black eyes, anything obviously monstrous, I might have found a way to dismiss it as some supernatural horror. What sat on my sofa was worse. It was almost right. The same features, the same tiny scar near my eyebrow, the same faint line between my brows. But the expression behind the eyes was smoother, less worn, less mine. My double blinked slowly. Their gaze moved past me to the man, then back again. Confusion rippled across their face and smoothed out. "What is that?" I whispered. "That's the you that belongs here," the man said. "The one threaded correctly through the next run. The system is already moving to settle into them. You're the part that didn't attach." I shook my head. "No, I'm the one who remembers the street freezing. I'm the one who walked up the stairs, took the clock down, came in here. They're just some kind of copy." "From your perspective," he said, "it feels that way. But you're looking from outside the rewrite. They're anchored. You're not." My double pushed themselves up from the sofa. Standing, they matched my height exactly. They looked around the room with a faint frown, like they were trying to place a feeling. "They'll call it déjà vu," the man said. "A strange moment in their own living room. Then it'll blur. The edges will scuff. It won't matter." My double's gaze locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought I saw recognition there, something like horror. Then it slipped away. They took a step closer, then another, moving around the table into the same patch of light where I stood. I held my ground because backing away would have meant admitting what was happening. "What happens to me?" I asked, not taking my eyes off them. "To the awareness that didn't join properly," the man said. "Usually it unravels before it has time to ask questions. You're lingering." "So fix it," I said. "Put me back in. Merge us. Do whatever you do when things go smoothly." He shook his head once. "It doesn't work like that," he said. "You can't have two fully aware threads occupying the same path. One has to go." I felt something cold and heavy settle in my gut. "Why them?" I whispered. "Why not me?" He didn't answer. "That's my body," I said. "My life. My home." "Not anymore," he said. "You stepped outside when you stayed awake. They didn't. That's all there is." My double reached out as if to touch my arm. Their hand passed through, just slightly, like pushing through water. I felt a drag along my skin, a faint pull. The room around us blurred for a heartbeat. I saw myself from their perspective, standing pale and wide-eyed in the middle of the room, and then I was back in my own angle again, gasping. "It's already choosing," the man said. "Reality doesn't like dangling pieces. You can either let go, or you can resist." "Resist how?" I asked. "By refusing to be easy to rewrite," he said. "By stepping somewhere it doesn't have a pattern for, away from every route you've walked 100 times, every habit, every plan. That's how you end up like me." The idea of becoming whatever he was, some maintenance shadow walking through pauses, terrified me as much as disappearing did. "I don't want that either," I said. "You don't have many options left," he replied. The television static shifted. For a second, the noise formed an image, My own face again, multiplied, rows and rows of me, each with a slightly different expression. Then it broke apart. My double moved back toward the sofa, as if drawn. They sat down, their shoulders relaxing. The room brightened around them. The sounds of the building began to seep back in. A toilet flushing upstairs, a distant laugh through the wall, the low rumble of pipes. "Wait," I said. "Please." I don't know who I was speaking to. Him, them, whatever sat behind this. Neither answered. My double picked up the remote, flicked channels, and settled on some program I didn't recognize. Their face slackened into that half-attentive expression everyone wears alone in front of a screen. My hand was almost transparent now. I could see the pattern of the rug through my fingers. "This isn't fair," I said softly. "It isn't anything," the man said again. "It just is." The last thing I saw clearly was my own profile in the television's reflection. The person on the sofa, my double, my replacement, whatever word fits, scratched their cheek absently, then shifted into a more comfortable position. The show changed to something brighter. Laughter spilled from the speakers, thin and canned and unreal. The room around us felt more solid for them than it did for me. Colors brightened around their body, shading in sharper lines. Around me, edges blurred. The corners of the ceiling softened. The doorframe seemed to breathe in and out, losing its straight lines. "What happens if I choose what you chose?" I asked, still watching myself. "If I walk away from all of this and refuse to slot back into anything?" "You leave the script," the man said. "You walk in the pauses. You notice every time the world stutters and resets. You see people freeze mid-laugh and resume mid-tear. You watch yourself get replaced over and over. You warn who you can." He paused. "And you do it alone." He didn't need to tell me it wasn't a sales pitch. His whole presence was a warning. "And if I don't?" I asked. "If I just let go?" "Then you stop noticing," he said. "You dissolve into whatever you were before this arrangement of memories. Maybe it's the first time, maybe it's the 100th. You won't remember either way." My double yawned on the sofa. The sound didn't quite reach me. They looked at their phone, frowned at the time, and put it face down on the table. "Long day," they muttered. "I should get an early night." "I didn't ask for this," I said. "No one ever does," he replied. My legs felt strange, like they didn't belong exactly where I was standing. I took a step back and didn't hear my footfall. The air around me moved, but not because I'd disturbed it. It moved because it was settling around the person on the sofa. "Is there really a choice?" I asked. "Or are you just letting me thrash around while the decision's already made?" He considered that. "The system will always prefer the stable option," he said. "If you stand still, it will clear you. If you walk away, it has to accommodate you. It doesn't like that, but it can't always stop it." He looked at me properly. "You want a real choice?" he said. "Walk out that door right now and keep walking. Don't go back to work. Don't go to the cafe you always go to on Saturdays. Don't call the same 3 numbers you always call when you spiral. Step somewhere that doesn't match anything it predicts for you." "And if I do?" I asked. "Then you become a problem it has to work around," he said. "Like me." It's strange, the way your mind can weigh horror against horror. The idea of becoming whatever he was filled me with a cold, dizzy dread. But the idea of letting myself dissolve felt worse, because it came with a false comfort. Another me, in another version of my life, content and ignorant, and never asking why the clocks kept showing the same time. I looked at my double. They were real, solid. They'd wake tomorrow and go to work, complain about the coffee, maybe feel a faint echo of this moment without knowing what it was. They'd live a life that fit them a little better than mine had fit me. Maybe that was the point of the adjustment, to smooth out whatever had gone rough. They raised the remote again, flicked channels, and stopped on something with bright colors and fast cuts. Their eyes glazed in that specific, comfortable way. I realized, with a small, sharp sting of jealousy, that part of me wanted that. To sit down, sink into the cushions, let the television wash my brain clean, and wake up tomorrow convinced that nothing had happened. To accept the rewrite and stop being the problem. That part of me was already being written into the person on the sofa. The part left in me was the piece that refused. I turned away from the living room and walked into the hallway. My hand found the front door handle without really feeling it. The metal felt neither warm nor cold. The walls on either side of me could have been painted on glass. "Once you step through," the man said behind me, "there isn't a path back to this version. You won't be able to knock and ask for your place in that life. You'll just be one more ghost in the gaps." "I already am," I said. I opened the door. The stairwell outside was still in that held state, not fully restarted, not fully frozen. The light hum from downstairs came and went in little jerks. Somewhere above, a step that had been mid-creak finished slowly and then stopped. I stepped out anyway. The air in the hallway accepted me with less resistance than my own living room had. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt something thin and important snapping, like a thread stretched between my chest and the person sitting on my sofa. I thought it would hurt. It didn't. It left an absence instead. "That's one step," the man said quietly, appearing beside me at the top of the stairs without opening my door. "You'll need more." "Will I see you again?" I asked. "You already have," he said. We went down the stairs together. At the first landing, he veered off toward a corridor I'd never noticed before, a slice of space between walls that shouldn't have fit there. It looked too narrow and too long at the same time. "This is where I leave you," he said. "You'll know the pauses when they come. You've already felt them twice. If you stay moving when they hit, you'll stay like this. If you lie down and pretend you're one of them, you'll stop." "One of who?" I asked. He nodded toward the door of my building. "The ones who never notice the freezes," he said. "The ones who think every adjustment is a choice they made." He stepped into the too narrow corridor. For a heartbeat, I saw other shapes in there with him, blurred figures moving in lockstep with no one, eyes fixed on scenes only they could see. Then the space folded, and he was gone. I stepped out of the building and onto the street. The frozen woman with the groceries finished her step. The dog barked and shook its head. A car rolled past, driver yawning behind the wheel. Someone walked through me without flinching, eyes on their phone, and didn't feel the slight chill that passed along their arm. To them, I wasn't there. To the man in my flat, sinking into my sofa, I had never existed in this form at all. I walked. I didn't go toward the bus stop. I didn't turn right toward work or left toward the supermarket. I walked straight down a side street I'd never taken, then another, cutting across the city in a pattern that didn't belong to any version of my old routine. At 4:12 p.m. the next day, the world froze again. I was in a supermarket aisle this time, between rows of cereal and tinned soup. People locked mid-reach, mid-step, mid-thought. A child's hand hovered a few centimeters from knocking over a display. A trolley hung with its wheels just about to squeak. And at the far end of the aisle, another person stood very still, breathing in a world that had stopped. She looked as lost as I had felt. Her eyes flicked up, met mine, and widened. I saw the moment she realized she was the only one moving. I saw the moment she realized she wasn't. I didn't walk toward her. Not yet. I let her turn in a slow circle, let her see the frozen shoppers, the hovering items, the drip of milk hanging midair from a leaking carton. I let the fear take shape properly, so she would believe it later when the world snapped back. Only then did I take a step in her direction. At the edge of my hearing, beneath the held silence, I thought I could feel something huge and distant noticing. The system doesn't like misalignments. It will correct her too, if it can. I don't know yet whether I'll warn her not to go home, but I remember the moment everyone froze, and the moment I didn't. And now, that's all I have.